480 BCE, Thermopylae. A Spartan soldier tightens his grip on his shield and realizes something terrifying. Even if he survives, he's still finished, because Sparta has a tradition that doesn't encourage bravery. It punishes survival. Back home, a man who ran doesn't just get called a coward, he gets erased from respect, shunned at meals, avoided in public, treated like he's contagious. And there's one sentence every Spartan grows up hearing, words that make retreat impossible, either with your shield or carried home dead on it. So when the Persians find the path behind them and the trap closes, this isn't just a battle anymore. It's a choice between dying here or living long enough to be destroyed by your own people. Let's go back. Before Thermopylae, before the Persians, before any of this makes sense, we need to understand what Sparta actually is. Because this isn't just a city, it's not just a culture, it's a machine. A machine designed to produce one thing, soldiers who cannot retreat. And the fuel that runs this machine? Fear. Not fear of the enemy, fear of home. Picture this, you're 7 years old, Spartan, male. One morning your mother walks you to the edge of your house, hands you a small wooden shield, and says 5 words that will define your entire life. Either with this or on it. You don't fully understand yet. You're 7, but you will. Because from this moment forward, every single day of your existence is designed to make you prefer death over dishonor, to make the idea of running so unthinkable, so socially poisonous, that you'd rather bleed out in the dust than face what waits for you back home. Here's what most people get wrong about Sparta. They think it was about bravery. It wasn't. It was about removal of choice. Bravery implies you had an option, and you chose courage. Sparta didn't want brave men. Sparta wanted trapped men. Men who understood, bone deep, that survival without victory was worse than death. And they built an entire society to enforce that understanding. Let me show you how it worked. The shield. Not your shield. The shield. In most Greek armies, your shield protected you. Personal armor. Keep yourself alive. But Spartan shields were different. Massive, bronze-faced, heavy as hell. Held in your left hand, covering not just your body but the right side of the man standing next to you. Which meant what, exactly? If you ran, you didn't just abandon the line. You murdered the man beside you. You exposed his right flank, left him defenseless, turned him into target practice for Persian arrows. So every time you thought about retreating, every time your legs wanted to move backward, you had to look at the guy next to you and decide, am I willing to kill him to save myself? That's not tactics. That's psychological engineering. But the shield was just the beginning. The real enforcement? That happened back home. See, Sparta didn't need military police, didn't need courts, martial, didn't need to execute cowards. They had something worse, social erasure. Xenophon, Greek historian, military guy, saw it firsthand, described what happened to a man who fled battle. Nobody would wrestle with him in the gymnasium. Nobody would choose him for their side in games. At the communal mess halls, where Spartans ate every single night, he'd sit alone. No one would speak to him. No one would pass him food. They'd act like he wasn't there. In public, people would step aside, avoid eye contact, treat him like he carried plague. He couldn't hold office, couldn't marry into a respectable family, couldn't participate in festivals. He was alive, but deleted. A ghost in his own city. And here's the worst part. Everyone knew. Your cowardice wasn't a private shame, it was public record, permanent. Your name became a joke, your family absorbed the dishonor, your children inherited the stain. One moment of fear, one decision to prioritize your life over the line, and you didn't just lose respect, you lost your entire future. So let me ask you something. If you're a Spartan warrior, standing in formation, and the enemy starts to overwhelm your position, what do? You look at the odds. You calculate survival. And then you remember, survival isn't the goal. Survival might be worse, because if you run, if you make it home, you'll spend the rest of your life watching people pretend you don't exist. You'll sit at the edge of the mess hall, alone, while your brothers laugh and eat and live the life you used to have. You'll see your mother's face when she realizes what you did. You'll hear the whisper that follows you everywhere. He came back without his shield. This is the trap, not a physical trap, not walls or chains, a psychological cage built from shame. And Sparta spent centuries perfecting it, because they understood something most societies don't. You can't make men fearless, but you can make them fear the wrong thing. You can make them fear life more than death, and that's exactly what they did. So when we talk about Spartan warriors being brave, we're missing the point. They weren't braver than anyone else. They were just more afraid of surviving. Now, let's go to Thermopylae. Let's watch this machine activate. August 480 BCE, the narrow pass between mountains and sea. 300 Spartans, a few thousand allies. Xerxes' Persian army, some say 1 million men, probably closer to 100,000, but even that number is insane, pouring toward Greece like a flood. And standing in the way? This. A bottleneck. A funnel. A place where numbers don't matter because you can only fight as many men as can physically fit in the space. For 3 days, it works. The Persians throw wave after wave at the Greek line. They die in piles. The Spartans hold. Shields locked, spears out, mechanical, relentless. King Leonidas, the guy leading this whole operation, starts to think maybe they can actually pull this off. Maybe the pass is narrow enough. Maybe the Persians will break. Maybe. And then, a Greek traitor, a local guy named Ephialtes. He walks into the Persian camp and says 6 words that end everything. I know another path through the mountains. Leonidas gets the news at night. A runner stumbles into camp, breathless, terrified. The Persians found a mountain path. They're marching around, behind us. They'll be here by dawn. And just like that, the math changes. Because the entire strategy, the only reason this insane stand had a chance, was the bottleneck. The narrow pass where Sparta's 300 could hold against Persia's thousands. But if the Persians come from behind, there is no bottleneck. There's just open ground, surrounded, slaughter. Leonidas knows what this means. Everyone knows what this means. Here's the thing about brilliant military leaders. They don't panic when the plan collapses. They calculate, and Leonidas calculates fast. He looks at his men. 300 Spartans. A few thousand allies from other Greek cities. Thespians, Thebans, others. He knows they're about to be surrounded. He knows if they stay, they die. All of them. So he makes a decision that most people misunderstand. He sends the allies home. Not all of them, not yet. But he gives them the option. He tells the Thebans, you can leave. He tells the other Greeks, this fight is over, save yourselves. And here's what's important. This isn't cowardice. This is logistics. Leonidas isn't trying to win anymore. He's trying to buy time. Every hour the Persians waste killing him is an hour Greece has to prepare, to evacuate, to regroup. So he needs bodies in the pass. He needs men willing to die, but he doesn't need everyone to die. Strategically, losing a few thousand allied soldiers here accomplishes nothing Greece can't afford to lose. But losing the time, losing the delay, that could cost them everything. So he tells them, go, and most of them do. The Thebans leave. Most of the other allies pack up and march out, heading south, back toward their cities, their families, their futures. And you know what? Nobody blames them. Because they're not Spartan. They don't have the machine in their heads. But then, something impossible happens. The Thespians, about 700 men from a small Greek city you've probably never heard of, refuse to leave. They look at Leonidas and say, we're staying. Leonidas probably tries to talk them out of it. He probably explains, You don't have to do this. Your city needs you. Your families need you. This is our fight. And the Thespians probably just shake their heads. We came to fight Persians. They're still here. So are we. Let that sink in for a second. These aren't Spartans. They don't have the social machinery, the shame system, the either with your shield or on it programming. They choose this. Actual bravery. Actual choice. They know they're going to die. They know it accomplishes nothing. For their city, they know their families will lose fathers, brothers, sons, and they stay anyway. Herodotus, the Greek historian who documented all this, makes sure we know their names. He writes it down, makes it permanent, because even the Greeks understood. What the Thespians did was different, rarer, more impossible. But let's get back to the Spartans, because here's where the machine really shows itself. The allies are leaving. The Thespians are staying by choice. And the Spartans? The Spartans don't even discuss it. There's no debate, no vote, no moment where someone suggests maybe we should retreat while we can. Because retreat isn't an option, not strategically, not psychologically, not socially. Picture one of these Spartan soldiers. Let's call him Dienekes. Actually, that's a real name. Herodotus mentions him. The guy who supposedly joked that fighting in the shade would be nice when told the Persian arrows would block out the sun. Funny guy. Probably dead. In about 6 hours. But right now, in this moment, Dienekes is doing math. He's looking at the mountain path, the Persian forces, the odds. And he's thinking, okay, so we die here. Or, and this is where it gets dark. Or I run. Because physically, it's possible. The Persians haven't closed the trap yet. The path south is still open for a few more hours. He could grab his gear, slip away in the dark, catch up with the allies who left, tell them, what? That he got separated? That he was sent on a scouting mission? That Leonidas ordered him to carry a message? He could invent a story. He could survive. But then what? He gets home to Sparta, and someone asks, where's your shield? Or worse, he still has his shield. Came back alive. Intact. While Leonidas and the others stayed and died. And the story gets out. Because it always does. Someone saw him leave. Or someone notices he's the only one who made it back. Or the allies who retreated mention that the Spartans stayed. All of them except one. And now Dienekes has to live in Sparta as that guy. The one who ran, the one who prioritized his life over his brothers, the coward. He imagines walking into the mess hall that first night. The conversations stop. Everyone turns, stares. Nobody says anything. They don't have to. He finds a seat, alone, because no one sits next to a coward. The food comes around, passes him. No one hands him a plate. He's invisible, and it's not temporary. This is forever. His name becomes a cautionary tale. His family absorbs the shame. His mother, the woman who handed him that shield and said either with this or on it, has to live with the fact that her son chose wrong. She'd rather have buried him. So Dienekes does the math. Death by Persian spear, quick, painful, but honorable, or life as a ghost in his own city, long, excruciating, and worse than any wound. And the thing is, it's not even close. The machine makes the choice automatic. Death isn't the worse option. Survival is. This is what people miss about Thermopylae. They think it's a story about heroism, about men choosing to die for glory. But that's not what's happening here. They're not choosing death. They're avoiding something worse than death. The trap isn't the Persians surrounding them. The trap is the society that makes coming home unbearable. Dawn breaks. The Persians come from both directions now, front and back. The bottleneck is gone. Leonidas pulls his men back to a small hill, one last defensive position, one last place to make the Persians pay for every inch. The Spartans lock shields. The Thespians stand beside them, and they wait. Here's what Herodotus tells us happens next. The Persians don't charge immediately. They wait, surround the hill, archers ready. Xerxes, the Persian king, watching from a distance, probably thinks this is over. These Greeks are surrounded, exhausted, outnumbered 100-1. Just surrender. But they don't. Because they can't. Not because they're too brave. Because going home alive is unthinkable. The Persians loose arrows, thousands of them. The sky goes dark. Dienekes was right, fighting in the shade. The Spartans raise their shields. The bronze deflects some. The arrows punch through others. Men fall, not all at once, one by one, bleeding, screaming, dying slow, and still they hold the hill. The Persians send infantry, wave after wave, climbing over their own dead to reach the Greeks. Spears break, swords come out, then swords break, fists, teeth, rocks, anything. Because stopping means dying, and dying means… Wait, dying means what exactly? That's the thing. At some point during this fight, maybe hours in, maybe minutes, something shifts. The Spartans stop calculating. They stop thinking about home, about shame, about the machine. Because none of that matters anymore. They're already dead. They know it. The Persians know it. This isn't a battle, it's a demonstration. Leonidas falls. Herodotus says the Spartans fight over his body, refuse to let the Persians take it. 4 times the Persians try to drag the corpse away. 4 times the Spartans push them back, until there aren't enough Spartans left to push. The survivors, maybe a few dozen, maybe less, pull back to the final position. No shields left, no spears, just men, bleeding, dying, defiant. The Persians stop sending infantry, just arrows now, because even Xerxes' soldiers don't want to face them up close anymore. These men are terrifying, not because they're winning, because they won't stop. The arrows fall, one by one, the Greeks drop, until none are standing. Silence. The kind of silence that comes after something unnatural. The Persians stand there, surrounded by their own dead, thousands of them piled in the pass like a dam made of corpses, and stare at what's left of the Greeks. 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, gone, and the Persians won. Obviously, they won. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Winning this fight cost Xerxes something he couldn't afford to lose. Time. 3 days. 3 full days of his army throwing itself at this position, bleeding, dying, while the rest of Greece evacuated cities, built defenses, prepared. The delay changes everything. But that's strategy. Big picture. Future consequences. Right now, standing in the pass, the Persians are trying to process what they just saw. Because it doesn't make sense. Think about it from their perspective. You're a Persian soldier. You've conquered half the known world. You've seen armies surrender after one skirmish. You've watched cities open their gates the moment they see your numbers. This is how war works. You show overwhelming force. The enemy calculates. The enemy realizes, we can't win. And then, if they're smart, they negotiate, surrender, make a deal. That's rational, that's normal. But these Greeks? They saw the overwhelming force. They knew they couldn't win. And they stayed anyway. Fought anyway. Died anyway. Why? That question, why, is what makes this story last 2,500 years. Because the answer isn't simple. It's not, they were brave. It's not, they loved Greece. It's something stranger, darker. They were obedient. Obedient to their laws, their traditions, their culture. And that obedience made retreat literally unthinkable. Here's what gets carved into stone afterward. A marker, an epitaph, placed at Thermopylae so travelers passing through would know what happened here. The historian Herodotus records it. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Read that again. Not, we died bravely. Not, we died for freedom. Obedient to their laws. That's the whole story in one line. The machine worked exactly as designed. But let's dig into what that actually means. Because obedient to their laws sounds noble, honorable, selfless. And maybe it is. But it's also terrifying. Because what it really says is, we didn't have a choice. The laws, the traditions, the social machinery, the either with your shield or on it programming, removed choice from the equation. These men didn't choose to die. They were built to die, raised from childhood, trained, conditioned, socially engineered to prefer death over the shame of survival. And when the moment came, the machine activated exactly as intended. So here's the uncomfortable question. Is that heroism? Or is it just really, really effective brainwashing? Let's sit with that for a second. Because modern audiences love this story. Movies get made. Books get written. Thermopylae becomes this symbol of courage, sacrifice, standing against impossible odds. And it is those things. But it's also an example of how a society can engineer human behavior to the point where self-preservation, the most basic, fundamental instinct, gets overridden by social fear. The Spartans weren't more courageous than other people. They were just more afraid of the right things. Afraid of shame, of dishonor, of social death. And Sparta spent centuries cultivating that fear, refining it, turning it into the foundation of their entire military system. Here's what that looked like in practice. You're born Spartan. Male. At age 7, you're taken from your family and put into the agog, the state training program. You live with other boys. You train. You fight. You learn that your individual life matters less than the unit. You're starved, deliberately, so you learn to steal food, not because Sparta can't feed you, but because they want you hungry, desperate, willing to do whatever it takes. You're beaten, humiliated, pushed past breaking points. And if you complain, if you cry, if you show weakness, the other boys punish you, not the instructors, the boys. Because Sparta understood, peer enforcement is stronger than any external authority. If your equals shame you, if the people whose respect you need turn against you, that cuts deeper than any punishment from above. So you learn. You learn that weakness is unacceptable. You learn that the group's judgment is absolute. You learn that your identity, your worth, your entire existence is tied to your performance as a soldier and your reputation among peers. And by the time you're 20, 30, standing in a shield wall at Thermopylae, you're not making decisions anymore. You're executing programming. Is that wrong? Here's the thing. I don't know, and neither do you. Because on one hand, this system produced soldiers who could hold Thermopylae, who could look at certain death and not flinch. That's extraordinary. On the other hand, this system removed free will. It trapped men in a cage made of shame. It made mothers hand shields to their sons and tell them, essentially, come home victorious or don't come home at all. That's horrifying. Both things are true, and here's what really messes with your head. The Spartans knew what they were doing. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't culture evolving naturally over time. This was deliberate social engineering. Lycurgus, the legendary Spartan lawgiver, probably semi-mythical, but the Greeks believed he existed, supposedly designed this entire system from scratch. The communal mess halls, designed to enforce conformity, the public shaming of cowards, designed to make survival without honor unbearable, the shield formation, designed to make every man's survival depend on his neighbor's courage. Every piece of Spartan society was built to answer one question: how do we make men who cannot retreat? And they solved it. So when we look at Thermopylae, we're not just looking at a battle. We're looking at the test results, the proof of concept, the moment when centuries of social engineering clicked into place and produced exactly the outcome it was designed to produce. Men who stayed, men who fought, men who died, obedient to their laws. But here's what haunts me about this story. The Spartans didn't die despite their culture. They died because of it. The tradition didn't give them strength. It gave them no alternative. And from Sparta's perspective, that's not a bug. That's the entire point. Let's talk about what happened after. Because the story doesn't end at Thermopylae. The Persians march south. They burn Athens. They seem unstoppable. But that 3-day delay, it mattered. The Greek fleet, evacuated, repositioned, prepared, meets the Persian navy at Salamis, and wins. Destroys enough of Xerxes' ships that suddenly his army, deep in hostile territory, has supply problems. He retreats, leaves part of his army behind, but the invasion loses momentum. And the next year, at Plataea, the Greeks win again. Xerxes goes home. Greece survives. So in the big picture, Thermopylae worked. The sacrifice accomplished its strategic goal. The delay bought time. The time bought preparation. The preparation bought victory. Leonidas's 300 saved. Greece. That's the version that gets remembered, the heroic version. The version that goes into history books and gets taught to children. And it's not wrong, but it's incomplete because there's another version of this story, a darker version. The version where we zoom in on one Spartan soldier, Dinakes, or any of them, and ask, did he want to die? Not, was he willing to die? Not, did he accept death? Did he want it? Probably not. Probably he wanted to live, wanted to see his family again, wanted to grow old, tell stories, watch his sons grow up, all the normal human things. But Sparta made those wants irrelevant, because the cost of pursuing them, the social death, the shame, the erasure, was calibrated to be worse than actual death. That's not heroism. That's a society holding a gun to your head and calling it honor. And yet, there's something undeniably powerful about what happened at Thermopylae. Something that transcends the manipulation. The social engineering. The trap. Because at some point, maybe in those final moments when the arrows were falling and death was certain, maybe the why stopped mattering. Maybe it became something simpler. Brothers fighting together, refusing to abandon each other. Not because of shame, not because of tradition, just because. Maybe that's what we remember. Not the machine that put them there, but the men who stood anyway. The epitaph doesn't mention glory, doesn't mention heroism, just obedience. Here, obedient to their laws, we lie. And maybe that's the most honest thing Sparta ever said about itself. We didn't produce heroes. We produced men who had no choice but to die like heroes. So let's talk about the one thing nobody wants to admit. This story shouldn't inspire you. It should terrify you. Because what Sparta built, what we celebrate, what movies glorify, what gets quoted in gyms and military academies, is a blueprint for removing human agency, for taking the most basic, instinct, survival, and rewiring it so completely that death becomes preferable to social rejection. That's not admirable. That's dystopian. And yet, here we are, 2,500 years later, still telling this story, still feeling something when we imagine those 300 men, shields locked, facing an army that blots out the horizon. Why? Because the truth is complicated. Yes, Sparta was a machine that stripped away choice. Yes, the tradition was a cage. Yes, these men were trapped into heroism. But they were also human. And somewhere in the gap between the programming and the reality, something extraordinary happened. Let me show you what I mean. Herodotus records small details that don't fit the noble sacrifice narrative. Like this one. Before the battle, a Greek scout observes the Spartan camp. What does he see? Some Spartans exercising. Others combing their hair. Combing their hair. They're about to die. They know it. And they're grooming themselves. The scout reports this to Xerxes. Xerxes asks his Greek advisor, "What does this mean?" The advisor explains, "That's what Spartans do before they expect to die. They make themselves beautiful." Think about that. Not prayer, not panic, grooming. That's not the machine talking. That's humanity bleeding through. That's men deciding, if we're going to die, we're going to die like ourselves. Or this. Xerxes sends a messenger before the battle. The message, "Surrender your weapons." Leonidas' response, 2 words. Molon labe. Come and take them. That's defiance, but it's also humor. Dark humor. It's a middle finger to inevitability. It's personal. So here's what I think actually happened at Thermopylae. Yes, these men were products of Spartan culture. Yes, they were conditioned to prioritize honor over survival. Yes, the machine worked. But at some point, in those 3 days of fighting, bleeding, watching their brothers fall, they became more than the machine. They became men choosing, moment by moment, to stay, not because they had no choice, but because they chose to believe the choice mattered. Why does this story last? Because it's clean, 300 men, impossible odds, last stand. Everybody dies, no ambiguity, no messy survival. It's a complete story, and the end is definitive. Compare that to most battles. People survive. They go home. They deal with trauma. That's complicated. But Thermopylae? Thermopylae gives us closure. It says, here's what total commitment looks like. And we love that, because in our own lives, where we compromise, where we retreat, where we play it safe, Thermopylae offers this fantasy of absolute conviction. What if you never compromised? That's intoxicating. But here's the catch. You can only glorify Thermopylae because everyone died. If even one Spartan had run, had survived, had faced the shame, the story would be different. Darker, more honest, but less inspiring. The perfection depends on totality. No survivors means no contradictions. The dead get to be heroes. The living have to be human. Did Sparta's system work? Short term, yeah. Thermopylae succeeded. But Sparta as a civilization? It collapsed, never recovered its power after the 4th century BCE. Why? The system couldn't adapt. Sparta's machine was so rigid that when the world changed, when warfare evolved, when flexibility became valuable, Sparta couldn't keep up. They'd built a society optimized for one thing, producing warriors who couldn't retreat. And for a while, that was enough. But eventually, the world moved on. And Sparta didn't. So here's the irony. The same system that made Thermopylae possible eventually destroyed Sparta. When you build a machine that can only do one thing, you become irrelevant the moment that thing stops being necessary. Sparta won at Thermopylae, but the machine killed Sparta. So when we tell the story of Thermopylae, we should tell all of it. The heroism, yes. The sacrifice, absolutely. But also the machinery. The conditioning. The way Sparta engineered men to prefer death over dishonor. Not through inspiration, but through fear. Fear of social death. Fear of becoming invisible. Fear of disappointing the mothers who valued warriors over sons. That's the full story. And it's darker than the movies want you to believe. But even knowing all that, Thermopylae still matters. Because those men stood, they held the line, they bought Greece 3 days. And those 3 days changed history. Maybe they stood because they had no choice. Maybe the machine worked exactly as designed. But they still stood. And in those final moments, when the arrows fell like rain and death was certain, they were still brothers, still men, still human. Maybe that's what we're really celebrating. Not the machine, but the fact that even a machine designed to produce perfect soldiers still produced people. People who combed their hair before battle. People who made jokes in the face of death. People who stayed not just because they had to, but because everyone around them was staying too, and leaving them felt wrong. That's not programming, that's connection. And maybe that's what transforms Thermopylae from tragedy into something else. Not inspiration, not a template, but a reminder. Even in systems designed to control us, humanity finds a way through. So let's end where we began. A battered bronze shield in the dust, and a sentence that trapped generations of men, either with your shield or carried home dead on it. Now you know what that sentence really meant. Not inspiration, not motivation. A cage. But here's what's strange about Thermopylae. The cage produced something the designers never intended. Something that transcended the machinery. Legend. Because Sparta wanted obedient soldiers. They got that. But they also got something they couldn't control. A story that outlived them. A story that would be told for thousands of years. A story that would mean different things to different people. And none of those meanings were exactly what Sparta intended. The Persians told this story. They told it as a warning. These Greeks are insane. They don't surrender. They don't retreat. Fighting them costs more than it's worth. That fear, that reputation, changed how future enemies approached Greece. Thermopylae became psychological warfare. The Athenians told this story. They told it as proof that Greece could stand against Persia, that the impossible could be achieved, that 300 men could buy time for millions. Thermopylae became hope. The Romans told this story. They told it as a model for discipline, for duty, for putting the state above the self. They built their own machine, their own legions, inspired partly by what Sparta showed was possible. Thermopylae became a template. And now? Now we tell this story as, what, exactly? Heroism? Sacrifice? Toxic masculinity? Military propaganda? All of it. None of it. Because the story is bigger than any single interpretation. Here's what I think. Thermopylae isn't about Sparta. Not anymore. It's about the moment humans face impossible odds and have to decide, do I hold or do I run? And the answer Thermopylae gives is complicated. It says, yes, you can hold. Yes, humans are capable of extraordinary things. But it also says, be careful what kind of society you build. Because the same machinery that produces heroes can also produce tragedies. Let me show you what I mean. After Thermopylae, Greece wins the war. Sparta becomes legend. But here's what else happens. Within decades, Sparta starts declining. Their population drops, their warrior class shrinks. Why? Because the machine that made Thermopylae possible was expensive. Maintaining that level of discipline, that culture of shame, that rigid social structure, it required resources, manpower, constant enforcement. And eventually, Sparta ran out. They couldn't adapt, couldn't evolve. The world changed, and Sparta stayed locked in 480 BCE. Meanwhile, Athens, messy, democratic, argumentative Athens, thrived. They built philosophy, drama, art, science. They adapted, they compromised, they survived, not by being perfect warriors, but by being flexible humans. So here's the lesson Thermopylae actually teaches. Absolute commitment is powerful, but it's also fragile. Because when you build a society that can only do one thing perfectly, you become vulnerable to everything else. Sparta won the battle and lost the future. Now let's bring this home. To you. Reading this right now, what does Thermopylae mean for your life? Should you be willing to die for something? Maybe. Should you build your entire identity around one thing and let fear of shame dictate your choices? Absolutely not. Because here's what Sparta got wrong. They thought removing choice made men stronger, But what actually makes humans extraordinary isn't the absence of choice. It's choosing well despite having options. The Thespians at Thermopylae, remember them? The 700 non-Spartans who chose to stay? That's actual heroism. They had options. They chose sacrifice. Not because society trapped them, because they decided it mattered. So if there's one thing to take from this story, it's this. Be inspired by the stand. Be moved by the sacrifice. But don't romanticize the cage. Don't build systems that remove choice and call it honor. Because the same machinery that produced Thermopylae also produced countless smaller tragedies. Men who survived battles but couldn't survive the shame. Men who died not for Greece, but because going home was unthinkable. Men who were trapped into heroism. And yet, despite all that, despite the machinery, the conditioning, the cage, those 300 men still stood. They held the line when the world said it was impossible. They bought 3 days that changed history. They died together, brothers to the end. And whether they chose it freely or were engineered. To choose it, they still chose. That's the paradox we're left with. The thing we can't resolve cleanly. Were they heroes or victims? Brave or brainwashed? Free or trapped? Yes, all of it. That's what makes them human. So here's my final thought. When you face your own Thermopylae, your own impossible moment, your own choice between holding and running, remember this story. All of it. The heroism and the machinery, the sacrifice and the cost. And then choose freely. Not because society trapped you, not because shame forced your hand, but because you decided, with full knowledge of the price, that some things are worth standing for. That's the difference between Sparta and the Thespians, between programming and courage, between obedience and choice. Sparta made men who had to stand. The Thespians stood anyway. In the end, that epitaph carved in stone tells you everything. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Obedient to their laws. Not their hearts, not their choices, their laws. And maybe that's the real tragedy of Thermopylae. Not that they died, but that they died obedient, still. 2,500 years later, we remember their names. We tell their story. We're moved by what they did. Maybe that counts for something. Maybe in the end, it doesn't matter whether they were trapped or free. What matters is they stood when standing seemed impossible. They held when holding meant death. And they showed the world what humans are capable of, for better and worse. So go. Live your life. Face your battles. Make your choices. But choose freely. Don't let anyone build a cage and call it honor. Don't let fear of shame override your own judgment. And if you decide to make a stand, to hold your line, to face impossible odds, do it because you chose it. Not because society trapped you, but because you decided freely that some things matter more than survival. That's the lesson Thermopylae should teach us. Not obedience, choice, either with your shield or on it. Now you know what that really meant.